OMG, it's HTAP. That's Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, say stuff out loud about a chosen episode while trying to guess what my special guest's favourite things about it might be.
Hello, I'm Steven Schapansky from the Doctor Who podcasts Radio Free Scarl, The Memory Cheats, and Lazy Doctor Who, and my selection for a commentary for Happy Times and Places is The Haunting of Villa Diodati from Series 12.
Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places. I've bitten the bullet. I'm doing my first Jodie Whittaker / Chris Chibnall Happy Times and Places. And I'm not going to say too much before I start, partially because I've got the episode on pause and I don't want to have to start all over again because normally I'll do a bit of talking and then I'll just about start and it'll go back to the menu and I'll have to start all over again. But also because, this is not an episode with a lot of history behind it, nor a lot of experience for me because, I don't have stories about, when I first encountered it and later encountered it and all of that. And also, frankly, don't know as much about new Doctor Who, especially very new Doctor Who, as I might do about old Doctor Who, simply because I've had more time to look. And I'll be honest that my journey through the most recent iteration of Doctor Who has not been one without frustrated hopes on occasion. So I'm going to be honest, but I'm going to accentuate the positive because that is what this podcast is all about. And actually the timing of me doing this, taking the leap, it's partially because Steven Schapansky, who you heard there, who's done a brilliant video at Lego Men and stills and everything. So, maybe one day this will end up on YouTube. But for now, it's an audio podcast. Thanks to Steven, who's been a great supporter of this podcast because his podcast is, the ace Doctor Who podcast, Radio Free Scarro, that, paved the way when I think podcasts didn't even exist. I think they might have invented podcasts. I think they did the initial one. I think they etched it into bark and hoped people would walk past the tree that they'd said things on. But now they are a record-holding and brilliant and very well-informed, well-intentioned, interesting to listen to. And Stephen is the sweetest of men and has been very sort of quietly supportive. But behind the scenes as well as publicly so by saying nice things. So thanks so much to Stephen, and I'm honoured that he has taken part and that he has been bestowed the honour of doing the first Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall entry into the Happy Times and Places canon, the episode The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which I am going to press play or unpause on. It's all right, Bernard. You can stay. Bernard is sitting next to me, but he's shifting. I don't think he likes me talking to you. I think he likes me talking to him. It's okay, Bernard. We're going to watch Doctor Who. Yeah, we're going to watch some Doctor Who. In 3, 2, 1. This is not a bad one for me to choose for my first Jodie Whittaker. It is the first one that has been nominated by contributors to Happy Times and Places, although we now do have a few more. Someone has bagged Demons of the Punjab but hasn't actually sent me their contribution yet, but I have Tom Gurrier sent me a file for The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and Joe Ford from the lovely Hamster with a Blunt Penknife podcast has sent me a couple of entries for both episodes of Spyfall, so they will happen over the next 2 or 3 years. That's not a plug. That's not a plug for anything imminent. But I very much enjoyed this one on broadcast. I was actually at my mum's house in Shropshire, which is out in the countryside, where it is slightly mistier and darker and colder. So it was a good place to be watching it. I think, and as I say, I remember feeling that this was one of the strongest ones of the season. It has the perfect mix for me. Of course, I can't tell you really exciting things. But I can't go. And I remember when I met this actor at the Club for Acts and Actors, and they told me about their episode of Secret Army, because these are all young people who would probably run a mile if I even vaguely approached them. Now, I can tell you without that we cut there to Stefan Bernardczyk's. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. Valet looking sort of slightly peeved, and I can tell you for starters that he is going to be one of my favourite things about the episode, because I was actually prompted to tweet and include him in the tweet after the episode aired, and going, Doctor Who's history is littered with actors doing above and beyond the call of duty, and Stefan Bernardczyk did exactly that as the valet tonight. I think he's absolutely terrific. It's he's got a wonderfully disdainful air about him. He brings so much. It's what I love seeing good actors do. Is to bring just a little bit extra that stops it from being, a dry expositional sort of characterization. But it's nice watching actors have fun, so long as they don't have too much fun and distract from what the script and what the director and what the other actors are trying to do. You can get actors ruin it by doing too much. It's a fine art, and I would say that Stefan Bernardczyk is absolutely pitch perfect as the valet. And I don't know these young actors so well, as I say. That's a great opening, actually, because you have the fabulous setup of the famous, Mary Shelley, a night of coming up with Frankenstein, and it seems so obvious now, doesn't it, that you would have a Doctor Who story set at the birth of one of the great icons of horror. And when I say obvious, don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I'm not going, it's such an obvious idea. I mean it in the sense that, one talks of as a comic. I mean, I'll give an example. There's a comic I adore called Robin Ince, and Robin comes up with stuff that is so obvious to me, but it's so obvious I didn't think of it until he says it out loud, and you go, that's so obvious. So the genius is and what I mean is, it's sort of recognise it's such a good idea, that it's such a good idea that chimes with me, that I could have come up with it had I had the wit and invention and intelligence to have come up with it. But now that somebody else has, it just all slots together. And it's the same with, the night that Frankenstein is conceived, Doctor Who turns up, and I do like the sort of cheat opening that our guest characters are setting up the scary night, and we go into the opening titles because they're shocked at our motley crew, who actually look rather fun here. That's and I do enjoy this element of modern Doctor Who, particularly, I think, because a lot of because old Doctor Who is now a period piece. This is very modern. This is contemporary, and so seeing Bradley Walsh and these two young companions, and the newest Doctor, but particularly I think Yaz and Graham, because they are younger than me. I suppose when I was watching, the companions were older than me, but because these sort of youthful figures, they're to me as an older viewer, are there to represent what is young and hip and modern and perhaps a touchstone with what the kids are up to, kind of thing. So they serve a slightly different purpose for me as an older viewer, but it's still a good one and a useful one, but a different purpose from the sort of older companion figures. There he is, eyes skyward. And that's all a lovely joke of setting up these great intellectuals, and they're of course it's sort of relevant to what I was saying about the companions, because I think of Shelley and Polidori and all of these people who when I was introduced to them as a youngster were these older figures, long dead, who were great minds and imaginative people and all of that sort of thing. But you learn that they were flawed humans with all sorts of problems, and in terms of Mary Shelley, terrible tragedies. But also, as you get older, you go, oh God, they were kids and probably quite annoying. And that I love the way that all of that, all of those sort of expectations are kind of played with. Now, he is a piano player, Stefan Bernardczyk, which I didn't realise. So I presume he got the part, or was seen for the part, largely because he could play the piano. So I think it's even more wonderful that well, that's irrelevant, because you don't look at that performance and go, well, yeah, it's a guy who plays the piano, who has a few lines as the valet. He's brilliant as the valet, and he can play the piano. So good for him. I said something nice about him on Twitter, and I think he followed me now, so I'm followed by the valet. So he's obviously not only good at, his fingers may be good on the piano keyboard, but they obviously take him to the right place on the old Twitter keyboard as well. And this is beautiful. This is beautiful Doctor Who. We're in a haunted house with Mary Shelley on the night of the genesis of the Frankenstein, myths. Well, not myths, but the horror story that is now the basis, the touchstone of a lot of modern horror, and also in terms of it being Doctor Who, it's in an old building with candlesticks. It's dark outside, and we've got a mystery. Where is Shelley? They had terrible lives, didn't they? I think she lost children, didn't she, Mary Shelley? So all of Frankenstein stops then being a horror story. It's all it's a bit about the continuation of life, and it's about it's metaphysical, isn't it? It's about going against nature, which is a huge driver in a lot of great literature, which. But also gives us things like a falling picture with a heartbeat, which is great, and a spider. I love that. You see, that's all great. I've only seen this a couple of times. I mean, I haven't. Oh, look at that maid in the background there. This is brilliantly done. Emma Sullivan is the director, and I think she has a real feel for how to do this kind of Doctor Who. And this kind of Doctor Who, as I say, really floats my boat, because it's and that is cracking. That's very sort of House That Jack Built, isn't it? That's very, it's one of those really unsettling things of going, I'm staying this way, which starts off as unsettling, but presumably if you keep doing that, it becomes, it's like you find yourself sort of trapped in a small space and you go, okay, well, I just have to find the door. And then if you realise there is no door, it suddenly becomes panic. And then if it starts sort of closing in on you, and that little kid there and the flashes of lightning. So this is I think this has a lot of really strong ingredients to it. And all of these are very, as we know from history, all of these are very interesting characters. So there's enough that you can sort of build on to give them something to hide, to give them, relationship stuff as well. But then and Doctor Who, modern Doctor Who, I think finds this very important to have the younger modern character display to viewers that just because somebody's from over 100 years ago and is wearing old clothes and speaks in a slightly different and more formal way, that love is still love and young people are still young people and all of that, and I think sometimes older viewers can scoff at that kind of thing, but I think it serves a purpose in a program that is that has younger people watching it. It serves as a useful gateway into the past, and exploring the past, whether through history or through character or whatever, is extremely useful, and broadening our horizons. And people do things differently there. So sometimes we need a translator, and if Doctor Who serves as that, I think that's a great thing. And if Doctor Who becomes a gateway, if some of the kids, that hand, Emma Sullivan is doing brilliantly here. I think there's little snatches of horror, and there's not, Doctor Who doesn't do horror an awful lot, but I find gothic-y, scary, spooky Who to be at the most effective. And also, I think when I started on my long tract about the companions, seeing them in the old clothes, in the old get-up, is rather fun. That's it. And again, and Doctor Who thrives on incongruity. So seeing, Ryan, the young lad, and Yaz, the policewoman, dressed up in period costume, when we see them as being the sort of younger, hipper end of what Doctor Who has to offer, is it has a lovely incongruity about it. Now, I do know this actor, Maxim Baldry, as Dr. Polidori. I love the name Polidori as well. I remember reading about Frankenstein and the night that it was conceived, and the fact that they had this mate, Dr. Polidori. And I also always thought that was a very evocative name for somebody, and it was almost like he was a character in it himself, you know. And I think maybe when I was much younger, I thought that maybe Dr. Polidori was a character. Is there, in Frankenstein, the true story, the one that Tom Baker's in, does David McCallum play Dr. Polidori, or have I imagined that? But anyway, it's they've given a character within it the name, to reference as a sort of in-joke about the conception of the story. He's a very beautiful man, isn't he, this fellow Maxim Baldry, who was in Years and Years, not the band, the Russell T Davies series, and was lovely in that as Russell Tovey's boyfriend, who was deported and led to a ultimately forlorn chase in an episode. Oh, anyway, let's not get into that. But he's very beautiful, and I was quite pleased to see him turn up, because he's a modern actor who I knew doing a Doctor Who, and that always makes me feel good, because I hadn't got a clue who anybody else was. Whereas I can watch an episode of Bergerac and tell you everything about everybody, and that makes me feel secure. So that's why I've really, honestly, this was scheduled to be done. Oh, she did that very well. Unrelentingly evil. They're a few years shy of the toilet. That's quite nice. Oh, yes. And that is a weird idea, isn't it? Because people were dressed so smartly, and wore a lot of white, which is quite hard to get. I mean, I've got lots of white shirts, and they're all absolutely mucky. But I suppose they had people to do it. But nonetheless, the point is they all, looked pretty well, and all had certain, manners and standards and way of doing conduct, and yet they did their business in a pot that then lay under the bed. The past really is another country, probably a slightly malodorous one. But I'm slightly fascinated with all of that kind of thing. I fear I'm slightly Swiftian in my concerns and worries about sort of the physical nitty gritty of a life that we cherish because of its its poetry and its enjoyment of finer things and and physical experiences and poetic thought. But when we all get down to it, we're all we do get up to certain things that we don't really. And I don't like scatological humour at all. And yet we are basic. Why am I concentrating on our baser functions when Doctor Who's companion is being throttled by a very nicely realised hand? And yes, the valet. I love the fact that the valet gets to twat that. And I the fact that's nice. That the director has let the Doctor do the thing, but actually given the moment to the valet behind. I like to think he earned that. I do rather like this thing we have of the Doctor tasting stuff to find out what it is. I would find that in other programs, kind of, there's no way that just because they're an alien they can taste a thing. But I think there's something about the Doctor being a bit sort of mucky and not having instruments to do it, but just sort of does it because the Doctor has lived a very, very long time and has got to the point where, you can run all the tests you like, but I can probably tell you what it is just by sticking it in my gob. That has a slightly different timbre and feel to it than if it was, an alien who is so brilliant they can just taste stuff and know what it is. I like to think that the Doctor's skills have all been sort of acquired rather attritionally and rather through the nitty gritty of experience and the sort of dirty business of exploring and finding things out for yourself, throwing yourself into it, rather than because they have a magical tongue or they've learnt it all from a book or were the best person at their school. I like the fact that the Doctor is kind of the Doctor's been to the universe of life. Now this young man, is it Elliot Collins Levy, something like that? I think he's doing the the prequel to The Witcher, which I had an audition for, the actual Witcher, just before it was on, and I didn't think much of it. And it was only a couple of episodes, I think. It's gone on to be absolutely huge. And I'm sort of thinking, I wish I'd got that. Anyway, if I'd got that, maybe I wouldn't be here now and there. Where would you be, eh? It'd be me on the red carpet, whereas instead I'm on the grey sofa watching Doctor Who. I like Doctor Who in a funny hat. I do like incongruity, and I think that's what Doctor Who offers us, that in a way that a lot of other series simply can't. Of having sort of quite winning mixes of ancient, of modern, of the grand and of the earthy, of the thoughtful and metaphysical and the silly and the daft. And don't you love a fireplace? I mean, the lighting here is all superb, and you know what? I couldn't tell you for a minute who's done the lighting. That's really spooky. And Bradley Walsh, I think, was a lovely piece of casting. I was really pleased to see that he was cast, because I'd loved him in the Sarah Jane Adventures, where he was that villain, and I think, did a real turn. And I think, he's well known for being a quiz show host, and I like it when people who we sort of have one idea of, although he's always been an actor, he was in Corrie for a bit, and of course Chibnall knows him through doing Law and Order. But when somebody is and I think again, Doctor Who gives people the opportunity to do that in the way that it, in the way that it's often cast actors that we know well for one thing, totally against type, and it's kind of worked because it's Doctor Who and it's a bit overblown and it's a bit larger than life. But that doesn't mean that the performances aren't real. And you can have performances that are larger than life and still real. It's complicated. So long as it's truthful, it doesn't matter if it's slightly big. That's why I love, Shakespearean acting. You don't mumble that. Do you know what I mean? It is larger and bigger, but that doesn't mean that it's not real, that the emotion and the essence of it isn't true. And that's the sort of acting I really like. I admire, actors that do very little as well, but say so much whilst doing nothing with their faces. But some modern television acting is so whispered that I think it might date. Do you know? I think people might watch stuff in 20 years' time and go, well, they thought whispering was acting in those days, didn't they? In the same way that you look at stuff that looked very modern 20, 25 years ago and you go, oh, okay, well, that hasn't aged so well. And I'm not talking about Doctor Who with that, because I think Doctor Who, as I say, lends itself to performances of slightly bigger heft. I love all of this, the going down the stairs and that mysterious figure in the door. This is truly proper Doctor Who. And it's a sort of a bit, I don't know why, it sort of reminds me slightly of a Doctor Who annual. I can sort of imagine a picture of this in the middle pages, with the text around it, and perhaps a sort of black and white sort of sketch of them going, we're at the top of the stairs again, or whatever. I'm not sure the Mary Shelley actress has done anything since this, which seems unusual because we're so used to, Felicity Jones, Carey Mulligan, Andrew Garfield are younger actors from Doctor Who, because Andy Pryor, the casting director, has a very honourable tradition of finding talent early. And giving Doctor Who retrospective kudos by us being able to go, well, they did a very early starting Doctor Who, But this, I don't think it's happened particularly with this cast, which is something of an anomaly. Although I'm sure for every Andrew Garfield and Carey Mulligan, etc., we can look at some Doctor Who's from 10 years ago where the younger cast haven't gone on to massive amounts either. So it's just that we remember the big ones, isn't it? But yes, it's beautifully shot. That lovely swooping camera. Oh, and of course, yes, the whole thing about the child really gives it informs our understanding of Frankenstein, the book, much more, because it is about loss and about creating life, which as a mother, if you've created life, within you, and then that life has been extinguished by the cruelty of fate and illness and all of that sort of thing. That idea of, cheating God it's interesting, isn't it, that I said going against nature, but when I think of something like Macbeth, where there are so many references to his murder of Duncan the king is going against nature, which gives an act like murder, which is bad, to put it mildly, murder of a king even worse. But then when it becomes murder of a king and so forth, the sort of ordained way of doing things, so it's not just the act of the death of a person, but the act of you're destroying the natural order of things. Now, of course, we're a bit more cynical about kings and queens now, so we don't think of that in perhaps the same way of going, well, we're messing with the natural order if we off the royal family. But what our cynicism loses us then is a drama that takes the person who perpetuates the act to something beyond just feeling guilty for killing a man, but to have wronged nature itself, and that is a bigger fight, and that puts you through more of an emotional ringer. That makes you consider more about life and death and beyond, and makes the drama bigger and the consequences greater than just those of earthly vaulting ambition. And I would say the same about science fiction when it takes on when it uses the stories of human beings to try and tell stories on a broader canvas and to resonate more than just with what happens to a group of people, and I think and that's why I think what Doctor Who and what sci-fi does is I'm not comparing it to Shakespeare in terms of the quality of the insight into the human condition and his amazing way with language and all those sorts of things, and the huge influence of the drama. But I'm talking about what the appeal of both might be, and why they resonate with us so much. Is I don't think it's a cheap connection to say that stories of a science fiction or fantastical bent are aiming to try and do more. Yes, they're brilliant if they enable us to identify with these characters, and it's working in sort of two directions. It's going, well, these people from the old days are actually no different to you and I, so you can identify with them and sympathize with them, and so the resonances go back in time, that we can touch those ghosts and feel their flesh, but also that the stories that they tell us more about then, and indeed more about us and the 20th century, and kind of try and resonate and tell us more about larger philosophical battles. Did I sound very pretentious then? I hope not, because I enjoy Doctor Who mainly because it spooks and scares, but I don't think there's anything wrong. Oh, that's a great image, and that's terrifying. A baby's cot with a skeleton in it. That's the sort of thing that if it was in 70s Doctor Who, we'd be going, that was like the scariest thing that anybody ever put on television. And partially, and if you've had kids, you'll understand this, the fragility of a baby and the way that you feel as an adult responsible for a vulnerable child. And that's when you read those terrible stories of bombings of children's hospitals and babies being killed, and you just think, God, that is about as low as mankind can get to extinguish a life, unsullied by the human condition that seems to make us worse the more of life and people and other things that we're exposed to. I think there's something about the use of a baby in a drama, and the threat to a baby and the fragility of a baby is really quite affecting and dramatic and unpleasant. And this stuff is great. The skull is moving, and the place folding in on itself feels a bit Doctor Who annually, but also a bit Christopher Bidmeady, isn't it? A bit kind of, but and again, I refer again, there's an Avengers episode, isn't there, called The House That Jack Built, where they're stuck in a building, I think, that goes round and round. I think Don Lever directed it. I remember watching it in a terrible hotel room just before Christmas, when I was doing Jongleurs, my last Jongleurs Birmingham, my last gigs before Christmas, and I had to do Don Lever's obituary from a hotel room. Unfortunately, it was on YouTube. That's a wonderful image, that. And of course, again, anybody that knows their Frankenstein myth is going, well, this kind of thing is possibly influencing what we know of this night. And it's always fun, isn't it, as well, when Doctor Who comes up with an explanation for something that we know, whether it's the burning Pudding Lane or the people jumping off the Mary Celeste. And now we know that we've got something that's some kind of influence on the Frankenstein myth. And of course it's a Cyberman. And we've had that we've had that anticipated by Captain Jack. But I think I'd kind of half forgotten of it. It didn't occur to me that a Cyberman might turn up. Whereas, of course, it's hugely obvious that the created man, or the resurrected person, the person whose life is made longer and yet loses its humanity because of augmentation, Cyberman thing, living dead if you want it to be, would be an influence on Frankenstein within the context of Doctor Who. And I know that Big Finish had Mary Shelley, and they do have an adventure where the Cyberman is suggested as an influence on Frankenstein. But I didn't really sort of think about that watching this. I kind of, because I know that any new Doctor Who is divorced from Big Finish in that way, so I'm able to sort of do the cognitive dissonance thing because I just am. And yeah, so so we're gonna and this is where we lose the valet, which is a shame. I do think the episode loses something when he gets killed, but I suppose it was going to have to happen. But I now Patrick O'Kane, who plays the valet. Oh, that's a shame. Patrick O'Kane, and that crying baby, juxtaposed with the image of that sort of cold steel, and it very cleverly misdirects us, doesn't it? Because he's a half human, half Cyberman. We might think, is this going to be a sort of Borg, Hugh Borg kind of thing, where the Doctor appeals to the human inside, and actually it's a bit grimmer than that, and that is to its credit. I think, I would be interested to talk to, people in 10, 15 years' time who are sort of 8, 9, 10 when they watch this. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of this is the most horrifying imagery of their entire life. And that's somebody being killed whilst holding a baby. I find that really gruesome. Again, I think it's the proximity of a young, unsullied, defenseless child with the worst thing possible, which is murder, death, the taking of a human life, and of course it is such a stark juxtaposition, the joy and purity of birth, and our instinct to protect, because the reason babies look cute is because that they need us to want to protect them, especially when they're screaming their blooming heads off and shitting all over the place. Then they go, look, I've got a cute face, and you go, all right, I won't drop kick you across the room for chewing my whatever, smashing my things, keeping me awake all night. This is a nice, the nice Doctor's trick of being a bit sort of sarky and lackadaisical, and but underneath it's the sort of whirring sense of danger. But Patrick O'Kane, Paddy O'Kane, he's a friend of a friend, so I've heard him referred to as Paddy O'Kane. He was doing a lot of acting at the Royal Exchange Theatre when I first came to Manchester as a student. So he was was he Brutus in Julius Caesar? I saw him in Absurd Person Singular. He was doing a lot of theatre. I saw both of those. He was in Absurd Person Singular with Mr. Rudge from Trial of a Time Lord and Tarkis from Revelation of the Daleks. Lovely Trevor Cooper. And yeah, in Julius Caesar, both of those actors were in that, as well as was Danny Sapani from went on to be in Good Man Goes to War. And Patrick O'Kane is a really interesting actor. I was astonished to see him turn up in Game of Thrones with no lines and about two close-ups, and that was it. Because I think he's Irish, so maybe and I know they used a lot of local Irish actors. But there's a Finbar Lynch as well, also known as Barry Lynch, was also turned up in Game of Thrones in a rubbish part. And you're thinking I'm all for using local talent in these productions, but I think when you're using local talent but using really accomplished actors to play tiny parts, I think that's the wrong use of resources. I think you use the local talent and you go and will use the fact that they're based here to get them decent parts, not to just use their proximity to swell out our smaller ranks, if you like. That's a great image. And Patrick O'Kane I also saw in The Crucible, playing John Proctor at the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. What a cast that had. Susan Engel, Vivian Fay was in it. Malcolm Rogers, Dracula from The Chase, but also Christopher Fulford, who's not been in Doctor Who but should have been, and he's Camille Kajuri's husband. And Emma Cunniff, who is an old, I sort of, I got to know a bit years ago. Haven't seen her for a while, but we're Facebook friends. But she's a lovely actress. She's in Night Terrors. Anyway, that production of The Crucible, I mention it not just to say who was in it, but it's relevant to Patrick O'Kane because his physical acting after John Proctor had been tortured, as he is at the end of The Crucible, was the most harrowing, brilliant piece of physical acting I've seen on the stage. It wasn't overdone. It was just real. It was an actor he's actually in a play with a friend of mine at the moment, and my friend just put a picture of them on Facebook, and he's got calves to die for, Patrick O'Kane, so I'm assuming he's very fit, but he obviously understands how to use his body, because his physical acting of Proctor on the back end of his terrible torture that leads to the end of that play was absolutely phenomenal and breathtaking. And so I wonder if that was perhaps one of the reasons he was considered for this role, because he's a very powerful physical actor who really knows how to use his body. And I think this image of the half man, half Cyberman is an extraordinary thing. And I like the way it uses the works of the authors to punctuate and inform the drama as well. If you've got these characters, you may as well use them. And here is Shelley. Not so when I said here is Shelley, the first thing that came into my head was Hewell Bennett, which shows really how my mind works. Shelley was a sitcom starring Hewell Bennett from episode 2 of The Chase, but it was a wonderful sitcom about a perpetual sort of loser. But he was a very different sort of character to Percy Bysshe Shelley, who we're about to meet here. And create one of those dilemmas that you can only really have in Doctor Who. Is we all know how Shelley died, so that dilemma that the Doctor has of changing history or whatever. Oh, it's a baby, and at the expense of a man. I think that's a really good dilemma that we get later on. Beautiful orange lighting. But the maid's dead, isn't she? That's horrible. And the valet's dead. Oh dear. Oh, yeah, I'm afraid so. It's very classist. This the serving characters die and the toffs all survive. So I'm sure some university students in 15 years' time will look back and criticise the 21st century for its awful snobbish agenda, if they so desire, and I'm sure some of them will. I sounded a bit like John Levine then. I'm sure some of them will. John gets very wistful like that sometimes. You're left holding the baby. I'd totally forgotten how dominant Percy is. I think Percy is also a character played by Hewell Bennett in a film about a man who has a Todger transplant and gets into all sorts of scrapes. So maybe Hewell Bennett did he ever play anyone called Bish? Maybe it was his life's ambition to play as many permutations of Shelley's name as possible. This is really well done, I think. Having this in the cellar, that image of that Cyberman is great. It's a really good, I think, addition to the cyber myth, if you like. You can only do so much with the Cybermen, I think, and when the series thinks of a sort of logical continuation or slightly different approach, but that is in keeping with what we know of how to deal with the creatures, I think that is excellent. Poor old Shelley. He's ill, isn't he? Oh yes, that's right. He's. So are we to think that the Doctor's sort of done the sort of mind meldy thing, which I don't mind because we know that the Doctor can do sort of psychic bits when it just helps us to tell the story or envisage the story, but not anything beyond that. I think would be would be a bit tedious and sort of unscientific. But I don't mind it if it's just a sort of Time Lord empath thing that occasionally helps with the exposition. I've got terrible double standards. And that's a brilliant explanation, of course, for the ghostliness. So you've had all of those things. Well, not quite all, as we will discover right at the end. And I like that note as well. I think it's quite fun to go as what Graham saw might just, there are more things in heaven and earth. I like leaving the odd thing unexplained. Because Doctor Who has to sort of explain mysteries in order that it can't just get away with magic to, either set up tension or provide frights that then just turn out to be, because we live in a world where anything can happen. Part of Doctor Who's, part of what you have to do when you're writing a Doctor Who plot is you have to give a rational explanation to the irrational. Otherwise, it's sort of cheating. And because it's partially what Doctor Who's kind of about is going, the mysterious and the unexplained is explainable by science. The dangerous is conquerable by science and by the application of it and by intelligence and wits and there's nothing we should be superstitious of and at the end of the day, application, intelligence and science can overcome, the fears of the dark, if you like, and it's because the things we fear are often the things that are unexplained, and dark forces often operate by kidding us that they're intangible, and if you actually break them down and expose them for what they are, you can defeat them. And that's the same as ideas that bad ideas, malefactors of darkness, who operate on dishonesty. That the bad guys are often persuade people to do their bidding because they lie to them, and then again Doctor Who shows us that the ideas of bad people are not all that they seem by confronting them with intelligence and knowledge and application. So Doctor Who deals with bad people in the same way that Doctor Who deals with the monstrous, the alien, the unexplained. It's all about putting them under a rational microscope, and also sometimes a humorous one, because also things that scare us or things that wish us harm are deflated by having a sense of humor about them, which is why I like Doctor Who. It's that mixture of defeating the darkness with intelligence and with humor, if you boil it down to its essentials. This is a lovely dilemma. Yeah, and this and I do like this idea of the poor Doctor kind of going, it's all well and good we have these lovely adventures, but actually, when the doodah hits the fan, I I'm the one that has to explain to the, we might all be on holiday, but when things go wrong, I'm the one that has to talk to the local police in the language that only I can speak or whatever. I'm the one that has to do the heavy lifting because I'm the only one that I can. And I like that take of the Doctor. I like that understanding of the Doctor and that uncompromising image of why the Doctor is essentially, really, at the end, rather lonely and rather burdened for all the fun, and that often the glibness and the humour is a front to hide that huge burden. And I think this is a great confrontation, and again it's nice that Mary gets her moments. I think it's tricky, isn't it? Because part of you wants to go, don't take Mary Shelley's agency away from her and go, the reason she got her brilliant idea was because of us, because of Doctor Who. But it's not really doing that. But it kind of is. but you have to do it. You can't have Mary Shelley in a Doctor Who. He's brilliant, Paddy O'Kane, isn't he? The Modern Prometheus, which is, of course, the subtitle for Frankenstein. It's Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus. I find there's a cruelty often in a lot of Chibnall's work, actually. I remember a friend of mine, we'll talk about it when we did The Woman Who Fell to Earth, but, the breaking of the teeth that Tim Shaw does. He's not afraid to take. I think sometimes the cruelty doesn't work because it exists for a moment, and then is gone. But this moment of cruelty is excellent because one, it leads us away from what we thought was going to be Hugh Borg, from what we thought was, Mary Shelley appealing to the human within, and what we'd get is, oh yes, he may be half machine, but there's a man inside there. But actually, whereas machines can be sort of cold and logical, and that's the danger of the Cybermen, he had a real cruelty to him there. So it's a sort of subversion of expectation of what is becoming the cliche of the humanizable monster, and for quite a horrible moment of, again, talking about the baby being a useless runt, that's really grim. And there's a wonderful dilemma here for the Doctor in a sense, and I think it's a shame for this story in a way, actually, that it continues into the next two episodes, because I think it's a good enough story to exist in a vacuum, and you sort of think, but if it's dependent on its resolution for a couple of other episodes, it's a shame that we can't quite view it as an independent piece, which I think is a shame for it. Here am I feeling sorry for a bit of television. But yes, because it's not totally self-contained, because of course Ashad goes away. This plays with this idea of, the Doctor can't be glib about the past. I can't win, which is, what does the Doctor do? And the Doctor often, will save a life and think, because the Doctor finds death of certain people difficult to deal with, but at the risk of hundreds of thousands of lives on another occasion. But I suppose it's the old, while there's life, there's hope. There's a fighting chance here, which, if she hadn't done what she'd done now, there might not have been. But that's inevitably going to lead to, a lot of death and destruction because of a choice that the Doctor has made. Which means, and sometimes the Doctor can't win in that, and sometimes the Doctor has to be really, really pragmatic. And sometimes the Doctor's sentiment of not being able to let a couple of people she's got to know die, to put the future in the gravest danger. And this, yes, the idea that the Doctor's planning step one, fixing the mess I created, in step two, is actually a really nice, it's like in Revenge of the Cybermen, where it says, I get good ideas a bit at a time. It is you can see why the Doctor has made that decision, but you can also see why the others are not wild about it. And I love this beautiful shot here that's such a contrast to the fact that the rest of the story has gone on at night. And I love that image of the silver figure in the darkness away as well. And the fact that it wasn't a ghost, it was a visitor from the future, and all of that, I think was
You pursued Mrs. Doctor without a care for my presence.
yeah.
The little of my thoughts and opinions.
Oh, and she gets her moment here, doesn't she?
Proceeded to use my person as a human shield.
Yes, that's so Lord Byron is, yeah. The man of words and dash and all of that is shown to be a bit of an arse, and it's nice that she gets that moment and he gets a bit cut down a little bit. I think Shelley is wearing a wig, isn't he? I'm sorry to the actor if that's her actual hair. It has a slightly synthetic look, but maybe that is subtext to say that it is reflecting the synthetic nature of cyber people, and that perhaps we are all cyber people with our cyber hair. But again, I wonder if that's something in 15 years' time people will look at and go, yes, that was a very 2010s wig. Interesting, yes, and of course we have the moment for Graham where he has had his own little adventure where he might have seen something that we don't have a rational explanation for, and I actually think that's all right because the things that Graham saw didn't affect the plot, so they're just a nice little bubbling sense of worry, and that's nice because he hasn't had an awful lot to do in this episode except for be sort of slightly sort of comedic stoogie, which is interesting seeing as he's such a gifted comic performer. I think I prefer seeing Bradley Walsh do the dramatic stuff, do that wonderful underplaying that he brings to proceedings, rather than fall back on the stuff that we can kind of know that he does. I quite like the juxtaposition between of seeing a quiz show host be a man who's suffered loss and is and has had cancer and is fighting against the odds bravely. Well, I wish all these young actors well, and I'm sure there will be somebody when I'm dead who will be looking back and going, and I found out everything we need to know about the cast of The Haunting of Via Diodati, who all went on to marvellous things. They're all very beautiful, aren't they? Hopefully one day there'll be a return to being able to be an ugly actor in things. Because, that's a lovely closing shot of Doctor Who. Lily Miller. I really enjoyed that. So maybe for another time I can talk about. Well, no, it's fine. As I say, I have had an up and down relationship with the modern era of Who, but I'm totally prepared to admit that is because I've always had a bit of an up and down relationship with Who as it's on. I think I'm a nostalgia freak. I like things when they've gone. And I think there is an element of that. I yearn for the past because I think I was happy then, but actually in the present it may not have been as peachy as I thought. I searched for my pot of gold yesterday, bizarrely, because I think there's also some comfort there because you survived it. So I'm perfectly prepared to admit that some of the things that I struggle with about the new iteration of Who is simply because I'm in such close proximity to it. I do have issues with some key elements, but that's not actually what this podcast is about, and I would have talked about them happily and thought I probably would, because I didn't think I'd have enough to say about the episode itself, but I did, so job done. The episode did enough for me to be able to accentuate the positive as much as I could, and I did genuinely enjoy that. It's quite long, those episodes, aren't they? I did genuinely enjoy that episode. 49 minutes, something like that, as opposed to the sort of 42. And I did think that was a really good idea, and I thought it was beautifully directed. And and I love the Doctor's dilemma, and all the stuff you've heard me talk about. So, yeah, I've got to choose my 5 favourite things. Bernard's been hiding his head under the pillow. I think he was a bit scared. My 5 favourite things about The Haunting of Via Diodati. Well, number 1 is the valet. Stefan Bernardzik doing that great actor's thing of giving a performance above and beyond the call of duty, and the wonderful Doctor Who thing of having smaller supporting parts being worth the actor turning up for, and you invest in them as a viewer, so then when something nasty happens to them, it has more impact. I think, and I hadn't really remembered this next bit particularly from my previous. I've only seen this twice, this episode, I think. Is the baby that I found really worrying, that vulnerability and that use of the juxtaposition of, as I say, fresh new life and the idea of extending extinguished life, of something set in the past where we as a modern viewer is of the knowledge that all of these young people are now long dead. I knew of Mary Shelley as a dead person, and so it's really interesting seeing them as young people, and that's why I think that seeing them playing around and horsing about like kids was it's also a lovely gag, because the Doctor's talking about how brilliant they must have been, and the valet's going, no, they're idiots. That's a lovely joke, but it's a joke that has more layers to it, that speaks more. So I think all of that element of sort of life and death, and what life actually means, what that spark of life is, that the baby has that Ashad sort of only has half of, but only having half of that actually opens a way to a cruelty that all of that I think is really well wrought and really well thought through, and it means that the story isn't just a story of a haunted house and a visiting Cyberman. It is a story where the storytelling has a subtext that informs the plot and also informs the character, and I think that's rich and I think that's rewarding. So I say the baby, but because of it opens us beyond that to what I've just said once. I'm not going to try and say it again. I stutter and say enough. Third thing has got to be the obvious wheeze that was so obvious nobody had ever thought of it, of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein being influenced by a cyber thing. I think that's a great idea, and one that seems obvious within the context of Doctor Who. So obvious that nobody had done it before. It's a great use of the format of the show. It also has that Doctor Who explaining something from history that is always neat if you're a viewer, and I think educational if you're a younger viewer. So that plays to all of that. And I hope this isn't too related, but I think it's such a striking image and such a good performance, and because of the subversion of the Hugh Borg kind of idea that it so easily could have been, is I like Ashad, the half Cyberman. It's a very good idea, but the execution is also excellent, and the performance is excellent, and I think particularly when you think, oh, she's going to hold its hand and he's going to understand, and it actually goes a much crueler and nastier way. I mean, I'm shocked at how wasted literally he is in 2 episodes time, as if they sort of come up with such a good idea but then aren't quite sure what to do with him. And I think Ashad fans could be rightly disconsolate about the rather casual way with which he is dispensed with, having been built up as this great threat. And as I say, I think Patrick O'Kane's a super actor, and it's nice to see him being given more to do by Doctor Who than he was by Game of Thrones. I mean, he's the funny man who talks in the third person and changes his face. He's a new-faced version of him who just is on a horse and sort of smiles backwards and goes off. You think, oh, he could have been somebody with a beard who stabbed someone. Anyway, so that's 4. So we've gone the valet, we've gone the baby, and life and that. The Frankenstein being influenced, and Shelley being Mary Shelley being influenced by Cyberman, tying that in with the Frankenstein myth in with the Doctor Who canon. Ashad, the half Cyberman. And I think the last thing has to be the good old-fashioned horror. That image of the skull in the cot is fantastic, but also, the little scuttling hand on the wall, the snatched figures, and I suppose that ties in with. I mean, I think a lot of that is captured by judicious use of lighting and thunderclaps, and so I'll give the credit to Emma Sullivan, the director, because I think she judges the whole thing perfectly. So can I say the direction from Emma Sullivan? But if we're highlighting a particular area of that, I think her handling of the spooks and the old-fashioned sort of horror story stuff, I think, is done particularly well. And it's welcome in Doctor Who, because Doctor Who hasn't done it as much as one would think, and yet when Doctor Who does it, it's always really effective and really, really welcome. And that's sad, because it means I've missed out that very simple, lovely idea of the stairs leading back to the same place, and that feeling of entrapment, and there's the bit, isn't there, where the Doctor tries to go out and can't go out. So, and I think all of that is done very well as well. Real sort of base under siege kind of stuff, but you really feel like the walls are sort of closing in, and I think that's really effectively done. But so that's my also ran maybe, but I mention it because I've got an embarrassment of riches here for, I think, a really good, strong episode of Doctor Who. Let us see what Steven Schapansky, and I've got it paused here on his video, and he's got the caption from the Ice Warriors with the word 1 on it. So this is his number 1.
The performance of Stefan Benderchuk as Fletcher, the poor valet who has to suffer the whims of Lord Byron and his friends. What I liked about most, and actually Toby and I shared this moment on Twitter. Toby tweeted out praise for Stefan's performance the weekend that it was happening. This is happening during Gallifrey 1 in 2020, and I chimed in by saying that the entire room full of convention attendees watching the episode on the Sunday afternoon really loved his performance as well, and it was nice to be able to share immediate audience reaction with a guest actor on Doctor Who, and he seemed to appreciate it as well. So it's a great performance, and that is one of my favorite things.
What Stephen had in his video there, he's not only did he choose that, he chose it first, like I chose it first. This is exciting. Am I going to have a rare win for Happy Times and Places? No, I've still got 4 opportunities to fail. And I usually don't waste an opportunity to fail. But Stephen on his video there showed that, and I'd forgotten this, that Stephen had joined in when I tweeted about enjoying his performance. Stephen joined in saying, yeah, he was great. We had a bit of a back and forth. And Stephen tweeted saying that when everyone had watched it at Gallifrey 1, they'd laughed at all his, brilliant bits of comedy, and then sighed when they realised he was going to meet his end. And then Stefan joined in on Twitter and put a little thing saying blushing, and then said that was lovely to know. So that's one of the nice uses of Twitter, where I suspect he didn't know that 2 big babies like me and Stephen would be saying really lovely things. And I love particularly that Stephen was able to convey that it had happened on a grander scale, and that his performance had beguiled a whole room of aficionados all joined together. Isn't that lovely? And he wouldn't have expected that in a million years, I shouldn't think. So that's a nice thing of Twitter and a nice thing of Doctor Who Twitter. Both things that can, I know from experience, be quite mean. Making somebody's day better. That's my. I've decided that's my philosophy in life. By the way, is all I hope to do, if anybody encounters me, is to make their day, if not better, certainly no worse. I've just so whatever I do in life, that's all I'm trying to do, and I don't think that's a bad maxim. This story has not a bad maxim in it either. Maxim Baldry. There we are. It all ties in. Right. So we're 1-1.
2. The photography. Most of it appears to be shot using only candlelight. I know it's been done before, like in Hyde, for instance. Things have moved on since having to get NASA-type lenses to shoot candlelight in Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick in 1975. But I love the look of it. It looks so atmospheric and so spooky and so well shot. So all credits to director Emma Sullivan and the director of photography, Ed Moore, for that one.
Well, and the 2, by the way, he used the caption for episode 2 of The War Machines on his video. And 3, we've got the number 3 backwards reflected onto the face of Gia Kelly. We'll find out what 3 is in a moment. Yeah, Stephen is much more clued up on such technical things than I am. I certainly think that's a very well chosen and legitimate choice. I again, in an episode where I'd got less to talk about, I think I could have easily just gone, the lighting, and I think I did mention the lighting in the commentary. The lighting is fantastic. I didn't know that about Barry Lyndon and Kubrick, but you can certainly see that you can do far more with lighting now than you could in a lot of classic Doctor Who, for example. And there are scenes there that are lit by the orange of firelight or the flickering spookiness of candles. See, candles don't only give you the light, they give you the flicker as well. And I think the lighting throughout that story, and then the contrast at the end when, day has broken and there's the beauty of, a new day, a rebirth. It all ties in, and it's told with the lighting as well. This is why I think this is such a layered and clever piece, and the visuals have done what the script is doing as well. So yeah, good choice. The lighting, it's beautifully lit, and I'm glad we got a name check for the director of photography there, because it's a splendid piece of work. Can't argue with that, Stephen, even though I didn't choose it.
3, the gruesome scene where Ashad breaks the nanny's neck. Yeah, I know. Usually in Doctor Who, like when a monster discovers someone hiding in a cupboard or something, the scene ends before anything happens. But here the action continues in a long shot where you hear the nanny scream and then it's stifled because you could tell what's just happened. It's brutal, and it's followed by Ashad raising the baby. You have a genuine fear for that baby's life, knowing what just happened to its protector. It's very rare for modern Who to not turn away when a gruesome killing happens, and I thought it was very brave and very effective when it did it.
4, that's the War Machines 4, I think. Yeah, it is. Do I get half a point for that? Because I sort of, the baby about, heightening the danger of those scenes. That's for you to decide. Sometimes I'm hard on myself and people go, Toby, you definitely should have had half a point for that. I think that's because I was so encouraged by the fact that we got the same first one, and I would easily have chosen the second, and I kind of chosen the third. Yeah. Do I get half a point? Go on. Give me hope. I'm still in the running as we get to 4. Go on. I'm almost hoping now that he chooses something completely different, because then there's no doubt, because I think it's worse to have nearly won than to have just completely failed. It's terrible, isn't it? I'd rather be nowhere. This is why I can't diet, you see, because the minute I have something I shouldn't have, I then go, oh, well, I've spoilt my good progress. I may as well eat everything in the world. And that was the same with booze. If I go, well, I've had a glass of wine now, I may as well drink 3 bottles. Whereas normal people just go, no, it's fine to just have, So yeah, my failure has to be, I can't have just nearly succeeded, because that would somehow be more tragic than being nowhere near. Do you know, if you're nowhere near, you go, well, I never stood a chance. I could kind of live with that. It's the hope. It's the hope that kills. It's big. Yeah, I suppose, it's like being... Is it worse to have never been seen for a role than being down to the last 2? Well, I've been in both situations. They both suck, which is why I then drank 3 bottles of wine. What is 4?
4. The whole subplot of Graham repeatedly seeing 2 ghosts, which you immediately assume, as the episode intended, that it's going to play a part in the plot somehow. And then you sort of forget it once Ashad turns up. But then at the very end, it's revealed that no, only Graham saw the 2 ghosts, and that ghosts may be real, and they sort of walk off to the TARDIS. I thought that was quite genius, because it's really set up as an important thing at the beginning of the episode, and you think it's going to pay off, but it never does, and you realize that maybe Graham did actually see ghosts. I thought it was a great thing, and a great performance by Bradley Walsh in that part.
Interesting, because I see it as a nice little grace note. But to give it too much import then makes me question it and go, but, ghosts aren't real. I don't want ghosts to be real in Doctor Who. I want a rational explanation. So I suppose if it's a cheeky grace note, I'm very happy with it. But for it to be front and centre and one of the best things about the episode, I'm less comfortable with that. And there you are. See, I'm falling on my own sword and going, I've definitely lost. But I'm glad that Stephen liked it. And I do like it, but I like it as a as I say, just as a throwaway little thing that you can go, oh. But the minute, if people now start saying to me, but ghosts are absolutely real in Doctor Who, I go, no, they were just playing with us. They're not saying ghosts are real. They're just going, or are they? And it's the or are they that's the point, not the ghosts are real that's the point. So so then it'll start annoying me, and then I'll get really cross. God, that escalated.
And 5, the bonus one, Jodie Whittaker's performance as Doctor Who, particularly the scene where she tells her companions that Cybermen are going to take another friend of hers, which is very much a reference to Cybermen killing Bill in Series 10, but you could also see it as Danny Pink, and even Adric, if you're looking that far back. And any scene that gives Adric's death even more weight is okay in my books. I really appreciated Jodie's performance in this, really sort of rising up from the flat team structure and sort of like chastising her friends for, not being able to make the tough decisions. I thought it was a very bold moment in the relationship of that group. They weren't just sort of 3 kids going along for a ride with the Doctor having fun. It suddenly took a very serious turn. And I think that sort of, is summed up in the episode itself. It's a very serious and fun and whimsical, but a very dark and important episode too.
Interesting. I wouldn't have chosen that bit. If I was to choose a moment for the Doctor, I'd have chosen the dilemma at the end, and I thought that was an excellent speech about saying, the buck essentially stops with me, which I think is a really fine moment. And a really good piece to give to the Doctor.
So to sum up, Fletcher, Candlelight Photography, Ashad the Murderer, Graham and the Ghosts, and Jodie Whittaker as Doctor Who. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, Toby. I'm Steven Schapansky. You can find my podcast at radiofreescar.com, lazydoctorwho.com, and thememorycheats.com. Happy times and places.
Oh, bless you, Stephen. And the memory cheats in the early days of podcasts. Oh, God, I remember the early days of podcasts. We had to make I think you could only get them by sticking a wire in a matchbox and holding it aloft. I was going through, I was a bit on my own. I was sort of homeless and going through a separation, and doing a lot of wandering about. I sort of threw myself into work and basically lived out of a bag, or in a mate's spare room. And it wasn't a great place to be. And Andrew Smith, who wrote Full Circle, said there's a great podcast called The Memory Cheats, and it's just Stephen and his mate, who I also know, who's also lovely, and another great broadcaster about Doctor Who. Randomizer. They've got the randomizer, and it stops at a particular Doctor Who story, and they just have to say what they remember about it. And sometimes they get things wrong, and sometimes they're not sure they have anything to say. But it opens up little, like anything, the minute you start talking about something, it opens up little doors in their brain, and they're both such good aficionados of Doctor Who and such good company to be with that I basically mainlined that. Because if they're talking about a story you hate, they talk about it in a way that makes you go, oh, maybe I don't hate that. And if they're talking about a story you like, it re-enthuses you about it. And sometimes you go, are they going to remember this? Are they going to get that right? Because sometimes they go, I think, and then halfway through they realise they've got it wrong, and no, it's this. So it's really good because they're both very natural, and they're both great lovers of Doctor Who. Yeah, he's a good guy, Stephen. So I'm very glad. And he's gone to the effort of making a video, which will be seen probably when I've retired, because I haven't at the moment got time to be editing videos together and putting them online. But I am filming this, so my burgundy ensemble. I've got a burgundy hoodie and a burgundy T-shirt with Quatermass Are We Martians newspaper on the front of it, and a kerchief, an ascot. No, it's a kerchief, not an ascot. That keeps becoming undone and has fallen off a couple of times, and I've had to readjust. So those visual delights. Oh, and Bernard has actually been in the corner for the whole of this. He's having a snooze now, but Bernard will be in the video for this, should ever it come out. I mean, if you're looking at it, that's what this is. Hello. But I suspect I don't look like this now, because at the moment I'm concentrating on the audios, because I'm also trying to balance this podcasting with, proper work. I've got this is not that this isn't proper, and I hope that you like it, but and I put a lot of effort into putting these together and making them as professional as possible. But I have other professional obligations that also need my attention, because much as I love doing this, Doctor Who fan is not my profession, even though it sometimes looks like that's what I'm aiming for. It really isn't. This is very much my hobby that I enjoy sharing with people, and I hope that in doing it in this manner, I'm providing you with a bit of entertainment, because that's the business I'm in. I hope the entertainment business. So anyway, enough about me. It doesn't matter, does it? Sorry, I've had a bit of a funny week, and a couple of moments on social media that have left me slightly sort of wounded, shall we say. So so that's why I sort of decided to go, well, I'm going to look at this episode that I've been putting off, because, as I say, I don't feel massively equipped to talk about the most recent period of Who with much authority or insight, and in certain areas much enthusiasm, and yet I remembered the way to respond to things that are negative is not to respond with negative energy, is to try and stick some positive energy out there, because people benefit from. And I'm not a softie, and I'm not an optimist, but if what you're putting out there is positive, that's going to nourish people better. Or anybody who chooses to listen to your stuff is hopefully going to appreciate more something that is positive and celebratory than because we can feed off negativity in the same way that we can feed off heroin, or we can feed off a nice peach flan, or a nice bowl of fruit. They both feed us, don't they? But the bowl of fruit actually makes us feel better, and probably puts a spring in our step, in the way that the immediate gratification of mainlining a bit of heroin that actually then clouds our minds and our judgments and indeed our whole life does not. So I could have gone in for the heroin of engaging in negative internet discourse, or the peach flan, no, the bowl of fruit that is looking at something that I was struggling to think about doing for the reasons that I've outlined, and going, no, I was going to see, and actually not having to try too hard to find plenty to celebrate and be entertained by, because at the end of the day, that's what Doctor Who is. It's my hobby, and I enjoy it, and hobbies and enjoyment should be things that produce positivity for you, and hopefully, if you are somebody who is in the business of communication, which is what sort of entertainment is, if this can be classed as entertainment, I hope it's not too lofty to suggest that that's what I'm trying to do here. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, I'm putting my thoughts and phraseology out there, because I hope it's something that nourishes you, or cheers you up, or distracts you, or whatever. And hopefully that's what this is. Anyway, I think I should have just quit by going, that was a really good episode and I enjoyed it. But this stuff does not happen in a vacuum. And anyway, I thought that was really, really good. And there's, plenty to write home about in that very strong episode of Doctor Who. Oh God. I might have to now go back and that's what you do, isn't it? That's the joy of being a Doctor Who fan, is you go back and you revisit bits of it. And I've done it with, stories that I've thought I didn't enjoy. I always liked this one. This was always one of my favourites of that year, as I said. But, I have gone back to stories, 15 years of hating them. And in fact, I did one this week. And watching and going, I really loved that to bits. And that's why we keep going back to these stories, or why I do, is because you will always see something new and something to enjoy, and looking at something you thought you'd written off, and actually discovering that you were wrong to do so, and that there's beauty everywhere. So yeah, you can see beauty, or you can, as Mary Shelley did, create a monster. Well, look, Bernard's off. He's had enough of my pretentious waffle, and everyone's a critic, Bernard. And I think if if he's taking his leave, I think that means that you guys are perfectly entitled to as well. So until next time, with thanks to Steven Schapansky, happy times and places. Bye, Bernard. Yeah, jump. Well, thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special and welcome guest this time around is Steven Schapansky, who can be found on Twitter at Legopolis. It's Legopolis, but with Lego. And also at Radio Free Scaro, at The Memory Cheats, at Lazy Doctor Who. I mean, the man's prolific and also very lovely, so do follow him in his various iterations. I'm grateful to him and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Glenn MacLeod, Joe McLachlan, Philip Marsh, Darryl McLean, Nate Lynch, Jacob Lumley, Andrew Llewellyn, Andrew Lester, Neil Little, Andrew Larson, Pete Lack, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Andy Kitching, Matthew Kilburn, William Keith, Judith Jackson, Andrew Jolly, Robert Jewell, Paul Ingerson, Darren Howard, Matthew Hooliston, Sam Hollingsworth, Simon Hodges, Stephen Hill, Matthew Herbert and Legion Henderson. The music is by Dave Gates, artwork Dylan Patterson. Have you ever noticed how you don't want to buy stuff that's hawked to you on podcasts, especially in a badly acted advert, which makes you lose much respect for your host, who you'd hitherto quite enjoyed listening to the voice of? Then become a patron. You know those ones where you go, these wallets, I've tried one myself, and I have to say, they're the best wallets I've ever had. Have you well, you've been given a free one, have you, as part of this? And that's why you've got one yourself. It's not like you bought it and went, I need to ring these people up and say, I need to do a slightly stilted advert in order to make my podcast more fiscally fluid than it currently is. Well, do you know what? I don't advertise anything on these podcasts apart from the podcasts themselves and the Patreon feed, which is what enables me to, well, no, I mean, I could do a Patreon feed. I know people do a Patreon, and it's not called a feed, is it? But you know what I mean. I could do a Patreon and advertise, but I'm not going to. And also, even if I had no patrons, I would probably be advertising free because I don't like them. But I'm making it sound like a point of principle, which will make you then go, oh, well, I think I should fund him. Go by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. I'm joking aside, though, that is useful to me and very much appreciated if you could. And it costs as little as £3 a month. And for that, you get 3 releases per week generally. That doesn't include the pictures of my dog. They're a Tuesday bonus. 3 podcasts, or maybe an exclusive interview or some photos of behind the scenes of something that I've done. The idea was also to do some comedy work in progress, but I haven't done that yet. Would you like that? Do you care about my stand-up? I don't know. I don't know if there's much of a, as I say, a yoke in the Venn diagram of my comedy and my Doctor Who, say, careers in inverted commas. But anyway, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You can also do ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke if you don't want to commit to the monthly obligation that Patreon is. Although it's a monthly obligation that starts from £3 a month, and you get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year. So it's not bad for, bonus releases and early content and, things like AMAs and sort of access if you desire such a thing. But what costs you nothing, and what's really appreciated in this day and age, because I know that God, prices on everything are hiking, and everybody needs to save their pennies. And as these are free at the point of contact, you can avail yourself of them for nothing. But what costs you nothing, apart from a little bit of your time, is to go to iTunes, Podbean, wherever you get your podcasts from, and to leave these a nice little review and a 5-star rating, which just helps to separate us from all the other podcasts that are out there, or makes passing punters go, oh, that looks quite good. I'll have a look at that. Or I think it makes the algorithms make us look a bit sexier on the old cyberspace radar. So yeah, do all of those things. That'd be really helpful if you can. The post-credit sequence is slightly topsy-turvy. I normally do Patreon Ko-fi, and then a musical sting kicks in. Then I do maybe something about my comedy, because I'm a stand-up comedian at XS Malarkey Comedy Club every Tuesday, Manchester. Also twitch.tv/XS Malarkey. And then there would be the second longer musical sting. And then this bit would be some sort of trivial musing that serves as a kind of interesting post-credits thing that some people hang around for because they're gluttons for punishment, but are disposable and probably missed by most people who've probably pressed stop during the closing credits, which is fair enough. So this post-credits has become sort of mingled with the pluggage, which is unusual. And would be remarkable were it not for the fact that it's not. Oh, that was something I wanted to say in the in the commentary and didn't and forgot. I'd looked up at Emma Sullivan, the director, and I don't think I mentioned Maxine Alderton, the writer, enough. She was a soap writer, did loads of Emmerdale, and I think that goes to show how actually a grounding in some of the sort of more popular drama is in no way a barrier to be writing good Doctor Who. And sometimes people can be quite sniffy about those, but learning the nuts and bolts of writing on shows like that and the pressures that those writers are under and the invention that they have to show because of the way that things are scheduled and resources are divvied out, I think is a great training ground for Doctor Who. And I think more people who've written for soaps being able to then unleash their imaginations on sci-fi would be an interesting possibility. So I didn't mention that but I looked up Emma Sullivan, and it said on her Wikipedia she's done this, she's done that, and she also directed this episode of Doctor Who Flux, which is the only episode of Doctor Who to have its closing titles broken up with a bit of action or whatever it is. That bit with Vinda that sort of came during the closing credits. That's that's a lovely notable piece of trivia about Doctor Who that you go, oh, that episode has that unusual thing, and that's nice to think about that episode in some way. And if you're a Doctor Who fan and you go, oh well, that's a nice little piece of trivia about that episode, but does it really then need to be ported over to the Wikipedia entry of the person who directed it? I like to think if I'd warranted a Wikipedia entry that mentioned a few things that I'd done, a slightly sort of trivial thing about a production I'd been involved with, even in a key area that actually had nothing to do with me at all. Was it Emma Sullivan, or was it? It might even have been Maxine Alderton. Actually, I think it was because you could say, well, it's a directorial decision, but was it a writer's decision? Anyway, whatever. Whether it was absolutely their idea or just something that happened when it was put together, it is a sign of the way that sort of information is put out there, that if somebody's got a particular thing that's their thing, and there's obviously somebody out there who goes, that's the only Doctor Who episode where the titles get broken up by a piece of the action, so I will mention that in whichever tangential area I possibly can. But I have to say, yeah, it's a bit like if I don't know, if I had an entry in somewhere, some sort of television companion or whatever, and it said, Toby Hadoke is an actor who's done this and a comedian who's done this, and he was also in the only episode of Peter Kay's Phoenix Nights to have more than 3 yellow shirts in one scene or something, do you know what I mean? Or he was in the only episode of Coronation Street to have had a fruit pastels advert and a Thai food tea advert in the first commercial break. That's got nothing to do with me. Why have you... Come on, I've done I've lived a life, and now I've had some sort of random factoid crowbarred into my life history in order to make me seem interesting in a way that I'm not, at the expense of interesting things that I might actually be. But it struck me at the time, but now I can't remember whether it was Maxine Alderton's or Emma Sullivan's, so I suppose there's no real harm done. But I did think, I thought if I was either one of them, I could be fairly rueful. But also, having said that, that's a Doctor episode written by a woman and directed by a woman. And I mentioned such things because that is, I think, very interesting and high time, and I think something worth celebrating, not because I'm woke or politically correct, but because it's not something that's happened very often, and a variety of voices and experiences coming together to make our programme make it more interesting. It's a programme about the vast potentialities of time and space, so increasing the experience of the pool of talent that it draws from can only, I think, be to its credit and to its benefit, and I think that episode shows that. So I would very much like to see Maxine Alderton and Emma Sullivan come back, and I'm very happy about that whole situation. But now I shall go and put something that's got nothing to do with either of them on their Wikipedia page. No, I won't. But anyway, there we go. That's the end of that.